مشاهدينا الكرام، أرحب بكم في هذه الحلقة الجديدة من برنامجكم بكل وضوح على قناة الكرمة وعلى مواقع التواصل الاجتماعي. حلقتنا لهذا اليوم هي بعنوان حوار مع القس الذي هزم أردوغان. حواري سيكون مع القس أندرو برونسون وزوجته نورين. طبعا كما تابعنا في الإعلام سنة 2016 قام أردوغان باحتجاز القس الأمريكي أندرو برونسون وقام بابتزاز أمريكا، لكن أمريكا فرضت عقوبات قاسية جدا على تركيا وأجبرت تركيا على إطلاق القس رغم أنف أردوغان. أردوغان الذي حاول ابتزاز أمريكا ومبادلة القس بالتركي الموجود في أمريكا فتح الله جولا، وطبعا لفقوا التهم وجعلوه إرهابيا حتى يحصلوا على مبتغاهم، لكن واجهوا إدارة أمريكية قوية أجبرتهم على إطلاق القس بعد شهرين فقط من ممارسة العقوبات. القس أندرو برونسون قضى 23 سنة في تركيا في خدمة تركيا وفي خدمة المؤمنين المسيحيين في تركيا، لكن رغم ذلك لم تشفع له تلك المدة الطويلة التي قضاها هناك. وكما تابعنا في الصحف، في الأول قالت واشنطن لتركيا أطلقوا سراح القس برونسون الآن، وبعدها طبعا عاندت تركيا وقال أردوغان لترامب تركيا لن تتراجع من خلال تهديدكم بفرض عقوبات لها. وقال أيضا أردوغان أن القضاء التركي مستقل، وطبعا نحن نعرف أن هذا الكلام غير صحيح على أرض الواقع. بعدها أردوغان قال بأن عقوبات أمريكا بشأن القس لن تجبرنا على التراجع. وبعدها بعد المفاوضات والعقوبات بدأ الكلام أو الحديث عن إطلاق تركيا للقس الأمريكي مع حفظ ماء الوجه. بعدها طبعا اضطرت تركيا لإطلاق سراح القس برونسون ودفعت ثمن ذلك باهظا. بعدها أيضا وصل القس بعد إطلاق سراحه إلى البيت الأبيض وعمل مقابلة مع الرئيس الأمريكي دونالد ترامب، بل قام أيضا بالصلاة من أجله في مشهد تناولته جميع الصحف العالمية ووكالات الأنباء. وبعدها أيضا حصل لي الشرف أن ألتقي القس برونسون وزوجته، وطلبت أن أقوم بحوار معه في هذا الإطار. وهنا صورة أخرى، وأيضا كتب بعد ذلك كتب القس برونسون كتابا اسمه رهينة من أجل الله. إذن حواري سيتمحور حول لماذا سجن القس برونسون في تركيا بعد قضاء حوالي 23 سنة من هناك، ولماذا لفقوا له تهمة الإرهاب، ولماذا في الأخير اضطر أردوغان لإطلاق سراحه مرغما ومستسلما للضغوطات الأمريكية. لماذا كان يقول بأن القضاء مستقل ومع ذلك أطلق سراحه في الأخير؟ كيف تطورت هذه الأحداث وكيف حصلت وما الذي حصل له ولزوجته خلال تقريبا 2 من الاحتجاز؟ كل هذه الأسئلة سنعرف أجوبتها في حوار شيق مع القس برونسون وزوجته نورين. طبعا الغرض من هذا الحوار هو إلقاء الضوء على الملابسات التي حصلت في السجن لهما وماذا حصل في هذه الأثناء. أتمنى لكم فرجة ممتعة في هذا الحوار.
معنا القس برونسون وزوجته نورين، كتاب جديد God's Hostage أو سجين من أجل الله إذا أردنا تقريب المعنى. We have Pastor Andrew Bronson with us and his wife, Miss Bronson, but they allowed me to address them informally. Andrew, Noreen, welcome to my show.
Thank you.
I really was blessed reading your book, and your story is amazing, and it shows just how our God is awesome, and it's just an amazing story. The name just caught my attention, God's hostage. Why God's hostage?
I think this is to emphasize the God story, because most people have heard of the imprisonment, and obviously I tell my story, what my experience was, my struggles, and the way that God took me through, but that's sort of focusing on the human side still. And also the political intrigue, the Turkish government, the false charges, all of those things. But behind all of that, there was God's story going on. So I was Erdogan's hostage. That's the president of Turkey, President Erdogan. I was really his hostage for 2 years. But God was involved. And when the right time came, when he had accomplished what he wanted to through my imprisonment, when God had finished what he wanted to through my imprisonment, then he caused me to be released. So I say it was really God's story too. The human story, but God's story behind it all. So I was really God's hostage.
But why not prisoner? Why hostage? Just a technical.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
So actually, the publisher suggested this title because as the time went on, as the imprisonment went on, then the U.S. government started to refer to him as hostage.
Yes.
So they probably took it from that.
Okay. So let me go at the beginnings. Both of you were solid Christians, believe in God. Why would two Americans just go to Turkey? I mean, people are going the other way, not from those countries to, not from America to the Muslim world. It's the other way around. Why you will leave America and go to Turkey?
Can I start off by saying we actually wanted to go to Egypt?
Really?
Yes, that was what we really wanted. Our desire was to go to the Arab world, and then our church asked us to go to Turkey. So you can go on.
Yes, I was going to say something along those lines. So when we hear Arabic, that's the language we were hoping to be speaking. But the Lord, shortly after we were married, the Lord worked in both of our hearts and showed that he wanted us to go to the Muslim world.
Why?
It's because of the love that he has for the people there. And so he put some of that love in our hearts. And that's the only thing I can explain.
So you are telling me you love Muslims?
Yes. Yes.
I mean,
we say we love the Turks. Now, we have suffered at the hands of the Turkish government.
Yes.
But we say we love Turkey, we love the Turks. This is not just talking about how we love the food and the culture. We did live there 25 years, and our children were born there, grew up there. So obviously we appreciate many things about the culture and the people. But when we talk about loving the Turks, we believe God gave us some of his love. It's a supernatural love. And this love isn't about our feelings primarily for the Turks. It's a commitment to see God's blessing come to them, to work for their good.
So you went as missionaries to Turkey?
Yes. So we went to bring the good news about Jesus Christ.
To preach the gospel to them.
Yes, in whatever way we could do it, yes.
And so many in the Muslim world, they see missionaries as spies and CIA agents. Myself, I grew up with that idea.
So we didn't use the word missionaries. What we would say is we work in a church because we know that there's that, from the past, there's that association, and people portray missionaries as being agents of foreign governments. So we would explain to the Turks, no government sent us. For example, we're American. The American government does not send any church workers out. They, they're not allowed to. We were sent by people just like you, teachers, lawyers, doctors, plumbers, people who work and who then, because they want Muslims to hear about Jesus, they're willing to take some of their money and help somebody go to do that. And so we told everyone, we work in a church and we're here to tell you about Jesus.
So we were very open about what we did and why we were there. We just didn't use that word missionary.
You shared with people in the community. You told them that you are here to serve.
Sure.
And you lived there, you say, 25 years?
23 years by choice and 2 years by force.
And how was it? Besides the end story, we're coming to it, but how was the 23 years?
So I will say I had so much wanted to go to Egypt that when our church asked us to go to Turkey, I was very disappointed. I did not want to go. I cried on the plane. I thought my life is finished. So I started out very negative.
Yeah.
But over 3.5, 4-year mark, I didn't come back to the U.S. during this time because I thought if I leave, I won't come back. God just tied my heart there, and He put a love that I really can't explain it, but somehow God did this, and a real commitment. This is where we're supposed to be. We want to see blessing come to this land.
So we started to study Turkish. We enrolled in a Turkish university to meet students and learn about the culture. And then we moved to a city called Izmir, which is ancient Smyrna from the Bible. And we started a church. And after that, we worked in about 6 different churches that we helped to start with a team. And also, when the civil war in Syria heated up, many refugees came into Turkey. So then we began to try to help them. In a small way, we would try to provide food or blankets or help like that. But also, our goal was to also tell them about the love of Jesus. And so, hoping that some would turn to Jesus, and those who did, a number of them, we hope they would return to Syria and be the beginning of churches there.
And did you have some Christian believers from Turkey itself, like Turkish people?
Yes.
Yes.
In the church?
Yes. So our doors were open to anybody who wanted to come in. You know, anyone who was living there could come in. But our meetings were in Turkish, and we were in Turkish.
So you're fully integrated to Turkish community.
Yes.
You speak Turkish very well, as I understood from the book. Both of you, right?
We make many mistakes, but we can communicate. I preach and teach in Turkish.
Yes. And during that time, you had also so many Muslims who come to Christ as well because their lives were touched, right?
Yes.
And you served them, and you helped everybody. We have a notion in the Muslim world that missionaries, whatever the title you will use, those who are serving their Christian faith, they are doing like an exchange. We will give you some benefit in exchange to believe in Christ. Is that true?
Many people said that, oh, if you go to the Christians, they'll put money in the Bible, so you'll take a Bible. Or if you become a Christian, then they'll give you a visa to America, or they'll find you a job, or get you a wife, or
so
things
you're
like
familiar
that.
with that.
Oh, yes. And
unfortunately,
yes.
these are things that are very
This is propaganda.
common,
It appears in the media, and it's just not true. But people did say those things. Actually, the opposite happens. We would tell Turks, no, we don't give money out. In fact, if you become a Christian, Jesus is going to ask you to give your money.
Exactly.
So we're not going to give. And actually, it's going to be hard. It's not going to make your life easier to follow Jesus. It will make it more difficult because there will be persecution.
But you still help people, even if we have those accusations floating around.
Sure.
And let me go now to the difficult times when you were arrested, firstly as an administrative arrest, and why that happened, in your opinion, both of you.
So that can happen, that people are deported, foreigners are deported from Turkey. Sometimes this happens. We were not expecting it. We thought we would live our whole lives in Turkey, live until we retired and even into our old age there. But we realized that could happen. We were surprised at the timing, but then they arrested us instead of just allowing us to leave on our own. They arrested us, and then they didn't deport us. The days went by as we were held in the detention center, and they were holding us. Yes. And then we were realizing this isn't normal.
Well, on the news, I wasn't really fully aware that both of you were arrested. It just seemed that the focus was more on Andrew than Noreen, and it was a surprise to learn later that both of you were, at first, you were both arrested.
Well, that's because when we were held together 13 days. Then she was released. And until then, there hadn't been anything in the news. So then they moved me to another place. They kept me in a solitary cell just by myself. And then Noreen started to tell people, this is what's happening. And so when news started to come out, she was already free. Yeah.
But tell me about that time. How did you feel when you were arrested, both of you, and you were just serving the Lord? You were not doing anything wrong.
So as Andrew describes in the book, there were certain risks that we were aware of. You know, someone can always come against us. In fact, a gunman came against him.
Yes, I read the
some
story,
years
yes.
ago. So you try to take the precautions you can, but you can't completely protect. But this, imprisonment, to be imprisoned was a new thing. That was not something that we had thought about so much. When we were in the detention center and being signed in, and they said we were a threat to national security. But just as we were signing the papers that we had been informed, the official in front of us received a phone call saying, and then he circled, or he checked the box for terrorism. And then my heart sank, and I thought, something is really wrong here. Something is going wrong. So from that, I didn't want to say anything to him and to make him more concerned.
Yeah.
But I was concerned that this wasn't a normal deportation.
And at that time, there had been an attempted coup in the summer, in July of 2016. So this is October that they've arrested us. And Noreen was afraid that we would just disappear into the prison system in Turkey, just disappear, because this was happening.
And
to
it can
people.
happen to anybody.
And we had, in 2009, God spoke to me and said, prepare for harvest. And so since then, everything had been focused in our ministry. How do we get ready for a powerful move of God? And so in 2016, when we're arrested, I was thinking, God, have you cut this assignment short? And Noreen was thinking, I wonder, God, if you're going to allow them to put us in prison with all of these tens of thousands of people who've been arrested. Is that where we're supposed to be to prepare for harvest? Well, is that where the move of God will start? So she was thinking, I may never see my children again. We may just disappear.
So at first they told you your visa expired and you will be deported, or how did...
Our visa was fine. There was no problem with our visa. We have not done anything illegal in Turkey. We did not break the laws. All of the work we did telling people about Jesus or opening churches, it was all done legally. No, we were simply told, you are a threat to national security, we're deporting you. And then they said, you're part of a terror group. And then when the U.S. government started to ask about me, they made all kinds of different, they would say one thing, oh, he's working with terrorists in Syria. And then they would say, no, he was supporting a different group. And they would just make up stories as they went along, trying to make something stick to us.
I heard also on the news back then that you were supporting the Kurdish terrorist groups. And
exactly.
You were involved in the coup against Erdogan. And,
they said all kinds of things, but this is what was really happening is they arrested to deport us, and somebody decided, we're going to keep him. We're going to keep Andrew Brunson. And I think that the goal here was to intimidate other church workers and have them leave the country because of fear. And also to the local believers, the Turkish Christians, to make them afraid. I think the message was, if we can do this to an American, we can do this to anybody. So it was intended to cause fear. And then later on, they decided to keep me and see what they could get from me, for me from the American government.
Yeah. Well, knowing that Turkey is a Muslim majority country, did you feel resentment to the gospel, and people are having this, let's say, enmity towards Christianity, or they are just normal people? Do they hate Christianity as a faith? The government, for example, the police?
They're very suspicious of it. And I think I want to explain what was really happening with the God story. It goes back to Turkey was the head of the Ottoman Empire, as you know.
Yeah.
And so they ruled over the Muslim world for centuries. And so they conquered many peoples. And wherever they went, the pressure on the church was pretty strong, and the church often shrunk. It would become very small. It was a lot of pressure. And so Turkey is a key country spiritually, they affected many people with Islam, and they affected, obviously, Christianity too. And so what God was doing through my imprisonment was he raised up millions of people around the world. It's astounding how many people were praying for me. It was an unprecedented prayer movement focused on one person.
Yes.
So I became a magnet, drawing in prayer from China, Iran, South America, Africa, from so many countries. And God did this. Why did he choose Turkey? He could have chosen another country to bring all this prayer in. Instead, he pulled it into Turkey because I believe that when something breaks in Turkey, when there's a spiritual change there, when the powerful move of God comes, that is going to then spread also to the countries that were under Turkish influence spiritually for centuries. So this is the God story that he was doing. So it goes, there's a lot of hostility towards Christianity in Turkey.
So Noreen, when you were released, did you start right away talking to politicians, media, trying to make some awareness of the story?
Yeah, immediately, not to media, because we were trying to just keep things quiet and hope to resolve things diplomatically in an easy, quiet way. That was our desire. But I did start to make contact with, who can help? This was a new situation. I'd never been in, who do you contact? Who helps with these kinds of situations? So yes, I was starting to make my contacts. If somebody would say, hey, try this, I try this. I was kind of going in every direction and trying to raise the prayer support also.
And I read how you went through these struggles also of faith in prison, where is God, and all these questions. How did you feel the 13 days as a believer going through this? You're loving the same people, they are hurting you. And you spent almost like the best time in your life just trying to serve them, and at the end, this is what you get. Well, how did you process that during those 13 days?
So I don't remember specifically, but we were praying together, we were worshiping together during those days, and I think we were specifically saying we forgive during those days, I believe. Because that's what we have to do as Christians. Actually, as Christians, we know that persecution can happen to us. And so we don't know what form it can take, but we know this can happen. And so in that sense, it wasn't a surprise. And then we know what our response needs to be. But it's difficult to work to that. But we know actually what we need to do. We need to forgive. We need to bless. We need to pray that God will change the situation.
I know that when you were together, she was a huge support for you, but then suddenly you are alone. Tell me about that experience.
Yeah, it was when they removed her, this is what I had been afraid of. I did not want to be left alone. So I started to think, okay, I need to really press into God because I had a lot of fear. What's going to happen to me? Are they ever going to let me go? And being alone in solitary confinement really, really pushed me. It tested me. And I had to focus on God throughout the day, the whole day, to keep myself from going crazy. I thought I was losing my mind. And what saved me during that time was a little booklet came through. It got through the guards, and it was a list of 10 different prayers, and it had some Bible verses. And I just used those prayers, and I'd use this prayer, and I'd go over it for about half an hour. Then I'd move on to the next prayer, and then the next one, and memorize those Bible verses. And it helped me to structure that time and fill this emptiness that I was in. That's what kept me going.
Probably what our audience do not know, I'm sure if they get the book, they will read it, but like me, I thought of Turkey as a more open country than Saudi Arabia.
Of course.
So when I was reading, they didn't allow your Bible in. For me, it didn't make any difference between Saudi Arabia and Turkey. And how did you feel when they didn't allow even your Bible? And you are a Christian.
Yeah, it made me mad. I mean, because I think that it was people in authority were just doing things that would make it more difficult for me.
But you are right that there is a difference and that Turkey has been there's been a lot of freedom.
Yes.
Actually, there has been. Not a lot of spiritual interest, but a lot of freedom overall.
Yeah.
And of course, Turkey is changing and it's becoming more Islamist.
Yeah. So weren't you surprised that even the Bible, I mean, as you say, it was translated into Turkish and it has nothing illegal in it.
That's right. That's
I can tell you, we so wanted to have a Bible. And in my second detention center, again, I couldn't have it. Eventually, I got one. Then they put me in a high security prison. I couldn't have a Bible again. And it took 2 or 3 months before I could have one. But just to have, once I had the Bible in my hands, it was such a comfort to me.
One thing that struck me while reading your story, the false witnesses they brought. What were the accusations, I mean, officially, and who were these witnesses?
So there were 3 kinds of witnesses. Some were people who did not know us at all, and they just had an agenda. And they said all kinds of lies, that I was a military spy, that I had said I would cut the heads off of Turks, which is, of course, very inflammatory, that we were working with the PKK, all kinds of crazy things. And then a second group was actually people who claimed to be Christians, who, some of them from our own church, who had left over the years unhappy. Some of them wanted to be leaders, and they weren't given leadership for various reasons. So they had envy and resentment. And so then they jumped on and they began to tell all kinds of lies as well. Then there were other witnesses who heard about my case in the media once it became more known, because I was held without trial for like 18 or 19 months. So it was quite a long time before they actually brought me to trial. So there were all kinds of stories in the media, propaganda, terrible lies that were being said. And some prisoners heard these, and then they thought, oh, if we tell lies about Andrew, then maybe they'll let us out of prison early or put us in a better prison. So there were a number of prisoners who came forward with false testimony. It wasn't as hard for me to forgive them, because I thought these people are just being used. You know, they're under a normal court system. If they said this kind of thing, no one would listen to them. So it was harder for me to forgive the Turkish leaders, because they were the ones who were doing this at the very top. But I still had to forgive them. And one of the things I did during my trial, I came to realize that it didn't matter how well I defended myself, it wouldn't make any difference in the verdict. And so I decided I want to be here as a witness to who I am as a Christian, as a follower of Jesus. And so one of the very important things I wanted to do was to forgive publicly, to say, just as God forgave me, I am required as a Christian to forgive those who hurt me. And so I choose to forgive. And then I listed by name every one of the witnesses. Said, I forgive them.
I am not seeking revenge.
I leave them to God.
I'm leaving it to God.
Yes.
Do you think the people, the officials, judges, people who were involved, they knew that you were, both of you were innocent?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Because the truth is, we did everything very openly in Turkey. Our meetings were open to anybody who wanted to come in. And so the police in Turkey watch us. You know, and that's okay, because we know that we're not doing anything wrong.
Were you ever interrogated in the past, let's say?
No,
years
never.
ago?
We had no issues with the police. And the average Turk, many of them will think that we're guilty, because they just hear all of the propaganda that's put out through the media, most of which is controlled by the Turkish government.
Yeah.
But the people who are actually making the decisions, they knew very well that I was innocent. In fact, the United Nations, they have something called the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention. They take about 30 cases a year worldwide, and they took my case. And their conclusion was that the Turkish government arrested me falsely, because of my nationality to use me as a bargaining chip, but also because of religious persecution. So for the United Nations to say that they were persecuting a Christian, I think is very unusual. But it shows they knew what they were doing.
So Noreen, you think you were targeted because of your faith and also because of opening a church and trying to serve your God there and trying to present the Christian faith in a loving way to Muslims? You think that made you an easy target for them?
That's what targeted us for deportation, for arrest and deportation. And then it also changed to being more of a political thing as time went on, you know, between the two countries.
But behind it, there is a spiritual thing that drives it. So that's why they decided to hold me, I think, to intimidate Christians. And the God side of the story is God outmaneuvered them. And he took what they intended to do to harm me, and instead he used it to bring great blessing into Turkey.
So all this prayer coming into Turkey, it's for the blessing.
Yeah.
And now it's a worldwide story. It's even there is a book, and now on this show many Muslims will hear about it as well. And it has a victorious ending as well. It's not only what they did to you. Yeah, it was painful, but the ending was really for God's glory.
Yes.
So tell me, I mean, after all this happened, I mean, there are a lot of details of what you went through. 2 years are not easy to lose from your life and to lose in a very bad condition.
Can I tell you what was difficult? 2 years, if I had known it was going to be 2 years, then even though it was difficult, I would just try to hold on. But I didn't know it would be 2 years. They wanted to give me 3 life sentences in solitary confinement. And so that means that I would stay in a Turkish prison until I die and not be with my wife and children again. So it's living with the uncertainty. And this is where people are really tested. Christians are tested. When we're going through a test, we often don't know how it will end or when it will end. And we just have to hold on and commit ourselves to persevere and to keep our eyes on God. And we don't know when it will finish.
When you were fighting for Andrew's release and you had, I mean, you were not certain what's going to happen, the outcome, and probably he will be sentenced for life prison. And what were you thinking? What was going through your mind?
Well, as I started, many things were going through my mind, but as the prayer started to increase, and by the way, I just want to thank all of those who prayed in the Middle East, in North Africa, because I hear that there was prayer coming from all these places, and especially prayer from those places was very special to me. So I just thank all the viewers who were part of this. As we saw the prayer rising, we started to realize there's something supernatural going on here. And God is raising up this prayer for him, also for Turkey, very much. But I thought, if God is raising up this prayer, I believe that actually he's going to answer it in giving his, not only his release, but also spiritual release given to many people in Turkey and the Middle East. So it gave me hope that God is going to answer this prayer that he is raising up. That's one thing. Another thing is that God had given us some promises through the years of things he wanted to do through us, and they had not yet been accomplished. So I thought, okay, these things, Andrew has a future outside of prison. I don't know how long this time will last, but there's something coming afterwards, and we need to hold on to that. Most of the time I thought that. Sometimes I was also in despair.
So when the government, the American government, got involved and the case became like a high-profile case, not just a pastor in a prison in Turkey, it became a cause for tension between the two countries as well. And so did you feel that God moved it to another level? Did you feel that God is going to intervene this way, since so many politicians were involved in the Congress and different places, human rights organizations, international organizations? So what did you feel when it got the whole world's attention?
So on one hand, it was very encouraging, and I think that behind, to reach the President of the United States, it's not simple.
No.
We have no connections. How could this happen? So it was actually the prayer that was fueling all of this, to even be able to get there. And I did pursue relations, in other countries that I thought might be able to help intervene. And really what God was doing was amazing. He has people here and here and here that he's using. So many places God has his children. So on one hand, it was very encouraging to get so high. On the other hand, it was very sobering because when there was a summit in May 2017 between President Trump and President Erdogan, and they asked for Andrew's release 3 times, and then it didn't happen. So it's like, okay, we've come humanly to the top, and it still hasn't happened. So that's actually quite scary.
And the U.S.
It was God who could only do it.
The U.S. kept putting pressure on, kept trying to do things.
Did you hear about that while you were in?
Noreen would tell me what she could, and there were so many times where there was hope, and then it would be crushed. And so I thought, it's gone as high as it can go. What more can we do? And I lost a lot of hope. But I also think that it's like a Pharaoh and Moses type situation in the Bible, where Pharaoh would not let them go, and hardened his heart. And this allowed God to demonstrate his glory and his power. And I think the same thing was happening here, is that there were several times when they made agreements to let me go. And then they pulled back and canceled. And I think that God was involved in keeping me there longer. There was a point where I believe God told me, actually I had a dream where it showed that 68 days later I would be released. And exactly 68 days later, the 2 governments, Turkey and the United States, made an agreement. Noreen got a phone call that said, prepare your bags, you're leaving. There's an agreement. On the very day that God said it would happen. One day after that, Noreen hears in her mind again and again, I surrender all. She said, okay, I have to surrender. The day after that, they canceled. And so I think that something like this happened several times, where release was close, and because we surrendered our wills to God without knowing even what we were surrendering, he said, it's as though God were saying this, if you're willing to stay longer, I can take you out now, but if you're willing to submit to me and stay longer, I will accomplish something much bigger. And so yes, it did go, as you were saying, it increased, because God was spreading this prayer movement all over the world.
So when they released you from the prison at the end, what was the excuse? I mean, it's very embarrassing for them to just the Erdogan was saying, I was following on the news, he said, our judicial system is independent, I have no power over it. We know that wasn't true, and we know that Turkey is like many other Muslim countries, they have so many problems when it comes to that. What was the excuse to release you at the end?
Well,
how did they put it?
They found me guilty. So the judges said, you are guilty of aiding terror groups. And so they said, you are a terrorist.
Okay.
And they declared me guilty. And then they said, because of this, we're going to impose a prison sentence. And then after they imposed the prison sentence, and I thought, okay, after all this pressure, all these things that have happened, they're going to send me back to prison. And my heart just dropped. It was very hard. And then right after that, they said, we're reducing the sentence, and you've already served some time. We're counting that, and we're releasing you while you appeal our sentence. And you can also leave the country if you want to. So it's like they're saying, please leave. Please go as fast as you can. And so then we're trying to get out as quickly as possible, because they could change their mind at any moment and arrest me again and put me in prison. So it was like a roller coaster, where I'm sentenced as a terrorist. They give me a prison sentence. I think I'm going back to prison. And then the sudden release, unexpected. And then within a day, back home in America with our family. So it was just an unexpected and very fast deliverance.
So now you're still in the eyes of the court, the Turkish court, you are a convicted terrorist.
Yes.
But they know that it's not true and they had to work a deal and let you go.
Well, the government knows it isn't true. The people up at the very high levels who make these decisions, they know it. But the Turkish people have been told all kinds of lies about me. And this is where we look at what Jesus said in the Bible. He said, people will call you evil if you follow me.
That's right.
Actually, Christians are the most loving, generous, kind people that I've ever met. But I often wish that the Turkish government, instead of saying, he's a spy, he's a dark priest, he's wanting to destroy Turkey, he's a traitor.
I heard
an enemy of the
Rambo.
Yeah, they call me Rambo priest. So they're saying all these terrible, terrible things about me. I wish that they would say, we put him in prison because he's a Christian, because he's preaching the gospel, because he's opened churches. Then I'd be proud of this. But instead, they call me evil. And actually, by doing this, saying that I'm a traitor and I hate the Turks and want to destroy their country, they're actually painting all Christians in Turkey with the same brush.
Right.
And so this was propaganda led by the government that really makes all Christians look like traitors. And of course, then the population begins to, this is all they receive through their news and their TV shows and their newspapers. So it just heightens the hostility towards Christians.
I was going to ask you, Noreen, how this affected the, powerless Christians there, Turks and others who live there. Constant fear because anything can happen. If it can happen to their pastor, it will be easier to happen to any of them. So how this affected the whole Christian community there?
So I think there was intimidation and there was fear. And we were afraid. We didn't know what was going to happen next, in that time. So far, no more people have been arrested. But I think that it's difficult. We have to be prepared for difficulties to come. How we can prepare completely, I don't know, but one way is really to be walking very closely to God and spending time with Him regularly. I always would, the women in the church, I would always encourage them in Turkey, to spend time with God. It's so important to be, that we can be the best prepared that we can be.
For our audience, so many Muslim backgrounds, I am one of them, and so many in more difficult countries, in Saudi Arabia, in Kuwait, in Egypt, in Morocco, Algeria. They're going through a difficult time. And we're used to it as Muslim background believers. We're not used to seeing missionaries going through that because most of missionaries, they will just deport them when they found out their relationship with the local church. You went through it. You were an exception. What's your message for those people like me who still live in those places?
Yes. So persecution is difficult. Jesus said it would come. My mother said something to me early on in my detainment. She visited me and I was weeping. I was full of grief and fear. And she said, Andrew, there's a long line of people who have suffered for Jesus Christ. It's a very long line that extends from now back 2,000 years. And it's now your turn to stand in that line. So there's a long line of people. There are many people who suffer for Jesus over the centuries. And it's hard. I didn't feel strength when I was suffering. I didn't feel God's presence. It surprised me. And I had expected something different, that I'd be full of joy and full of strength. People would say, be like Paul and Silas.
It's easy to say.
Because they sang in prison, and I think, first of all, I'd say, wait, they were only there one day. But I'd also say, we don't know how they were singing. Were they singing happy, happy? Or were they singing the sacrifice of praise? Where in their pain, they're saying, I am not doing this with my emotions, I'm doing this with my will, sacrificing before you. In prison, I would often say, when I was very cold sometimes, I'd say, I'm cold for you, Jesus. When I was just sweating, it was so hot sometimes, I take this heat and I give it as a sacrifice to you, my suffering now. It's for you, Jesus. Whatever I'm going through, they're doing it to me, but I choose to present it willingly as a sacrifice. So there's something very important. Many people, I was prayed for by many people. So I was one of the most prayed for people in the world. Most people who suffer persecution are prayed for by very few people. Some of them have nobody praying for them because their families have rejected them.
That's right.
So they're not known the way I became, but God knows them. And it's so valuable to him. And he is, they're heroes in heaven. And one of the things with persecution, I think that when we are willing to suffer for Jesus, it displays in a very powerful way to all those who see it, the worth of Jesus. I'm willing to suffer because he's worth it, because he is worthy. So it's a very powerful testimony.
Yeah, Noreen, I was going to ask you, you're a mom and a wife, and you felt how difficult for a mom and a wife to see her husband in prison and fight for him while not knowing the future. So many like you are now going through that in the Middle East especially. They don't know what's coming tomorrow, and they're going through that difficult time. What's your word for them?
Yeah. I don't have easy answers, but something that related to what Andrew was sharing, there was a time when we were maybe a year into the imprisonment, and I started to be thinking for several days, is it worth it? Is Jesus worthy? Those are two different things. And for anyone who's a true believer in Jesus Christ as Savior, we have to say he is worthy. He has suffered, you know, he came and humbled himself and did everything for our salvation. He is worthy. He is sinless and he is worthy. So that was easy to answer. Is it worth it? Is he worth it? Is he worth this pain that I'm going through? And I had to struggle through it, because when you're, you know, when you're out of it, you say, yes, of course it's worth it. We see the view of eternity, but when you're in the middle of it, all you want is to get out. You just say, God, I don't care. Just get me out of this. And I felt sometimes I'm being like squeezed here. I'm right here, and I want to just wiggle out of this problem, but I can't. I can't get out of it. So I understand, and what many people are going through is much harder than what we went through. We had people praying. We had, you know, God gave so much help to us. But all I would say is, he is worthy. It is worth it. And if I would encourage them to really press into God, because he is the only one who can bring them through the hard time. If you turn away, if you're angry at God, offended at God, you can't do it by yourself. But if you press into God, he actually will bring you through.
So there's something very important that had to happen in me. I say the first year I was broken a great deal, and I was very weak. And the second year, I felt that God began to rebuild me. And as I mentioned before, one of the big issues I had was I felt like there was silence from God. I felt abandoned by him. I was not abandoned, but I felt that way.
Of course.
He didn't let me feel his presence. And I had many questions. I struggled in my faith, and I had doubts. And I had to come to a point where I say, I have to make a decision. I made a decision. I am going to fight for my faith with my will, not my emotions, but with my will. I make a decision, and I made a decision to turn my face to God, not away from him. And I think everyone who's going through difficulty, many of your listeners, many people who go through persecution, they feel the silence of God. I don't understand why, but it is something that happens. There are reasons for it, but my emphasis is when you're going through the valley of testing, when you're in darkness, you have to make a decision. I am going to turn toward God. And this is what I said. Whatever you do or don't do, if you don't give me your presence, if you don't give me your voice, if you never release me, I am still going to follow you. So it was a determined And you know, even in my strength and my determination, it's very weak. But God sees that and he says, yes, this is what I want from you. And so then he began to strengthen me. And I call it cooperating with his grace.
Yeah.
So for your listeners, I'd say, make that decision that you will turn to him. Because I said, it doesn't matter if you answer my questions. I don't need the answer to my questions or my doubts. I don't need those to have a relationship with you. I just need to hang on, hang on. You know, the most helpful thing someone told me, someone wrote to me, I was getting all these things. Pray, you know, be like Paul and Silas, worship your way out, preach the gospel in prison. Somebody wrote to me, Andrew, just breathe. Just look to God, hold on, and just breathe. Hold on.
And I would, every morning before I even got out of bed, I'd lift my arm up and say, Jesus, take me through this day. I have to walk with you through this day.
When you look now back, it has been almost a year. What are your feelings now? How do you look at this whole experience? How you evaluate it? And how do you put it?
So not everyone has an ending like mine. There are, people would sometimes say, well, trust in God, of course, and thinking this, you'll eventually get out. There's no Bible verse that says, Andrew, you will get out of prison. Okay? So there just isn't. I'm very happy to be out. Not everyone's story ends this way.
Right.
So I'm very blessed. I'm happy to be with my children and with my family. As I look back at it now, I see so much more clearly that my imprisonment was an assignment from God, that he was accomplishing something with it. And that really helps me. Not everyone gets to see the results of their suffering.
Right.
So this has just been a blessing for me. And so we look back and we say, we have no regrets. Noreen told me when I was in prison several times, if we come through this the right way, then at the end of it, we will have no regrets. We didn't know what the end would be, but her point was, if we keep looking at God and keep our hearts open to him, not offended, then eventually we will have no regrets. We will be glad.
Do you have any bitterness towards Turkey as a government, or Turkish people, or those who accused you, or I mean, they said every bad thing possible about
They did,
you.
and I think that forgiveness is a process. You know, some of it just starts with just speaking, I forgive, but then you have to stay in that decision. And so it's easier to do from here. We had an interesting situation a couple weeks ago where we ran into some people from the Turkish government, and it brings back the feelings. You know, it
brings those memories.
yes,
Yes.
and all of it goes with it. And you have to stand again and say, I choose to forgive. I'm going to do this. I'm going to forgive. The Lord's Prayer, the way that Jesus taught us to pray, you know, that say, we forgive our sins as you forgive us, God. And so it's really part of being a Christian. But it's not easy. It's a process.
One thing that was brought during your story is the Kurds. I don't care what's going on between Turkey and Kurdistan as government politicians. I always care about people, normal people who are suffering and paying the price of all these conflicts. So I'm sure you had so many Kurdish friends and Kurds who are just normal people. They want to live a good life and they want to believe in the God they want to believe in. So tell me, how did you feel now, all this going against the Kurds in the northern part of Syria?
So I will say one thing is, you know, in our church in Izmir, we had Turks and Kurds, because there are many Kurds actually in Turkey as well. And really, our message to everybody is the same. The Lord calls us to love one another. And even when we were in Turkey, we tried to be in Turkey, we're there as believers of Jesus Christ, not as Americans. We can't help that we are Americans.
Yes.
But this is not our primary thing, and we were always encouraging among believers. That has to start there. So, of course, we're sad with the loss of life. I can't remember exactly the question, so you take it from here.
Yes, we're distressed. Many of we tried to help refugees, and a number of them went back into Syria, and they're in the areas that have been attacked. And some of them had become Christians and were the beginning of small churches. So it's very distressing. One of the things that I've said for years, and it actually was used against me in the court case, said that God will shake the foundations of the things we trust in. Let me say that again. God will allow the things we trust in to be shaken to get our attention. And there have been many, many things that have shaken the Syrian refugees. So we're praying, even though it's a terrible situation.
It is.
Very, very tragic.
So we don't say this lightly,
So
difficulties will bring this. We don't say it lightly.
It's very tragic. What we're praying is that in the midst of that, God will, in a way only He can do, turn the trajectory of this conflict in a way that will bring many people to faith. But it's a very sad thing.
Well, I think this will be my last question. And thank you so much for coming and being on my show, and for your faithfulness, both of you. It just gave us an example how to stand. I know it wasn't difficult and there were ups and downs,
Sure.
but at least you showed us how we can witness even through difficult times. Tell me, what's your last words for our audience? What do you want to say?
Well, He's worthy and He's worth it. I know that without any question.
Amen to that.
And I ask our Father to pour into my brothers and sisters the perseverance, the endurance, the courage, and the strength of Jesus, so that they can run the race that's set before them and finish well.
Thank you so much. Very powerful words.
Yes. We bless the listeners in the Middle East, North Africa, wherever they are. We just bless them with blessings from heaven.
Well, thank you also for loving Muslims and loving Middle Easterns, loving Egyptians, and I'm sure you love Moroccans as well. I'm originally Moroccan, and I'm sure so many believers and non-believers as well will be blessed with your testimony. Thank you so much for being here.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you.